Hey everyone, this is Elon from the Egard podcast. I'm here with Jordan Foltz, and we got a little something to talk about today that's a little out of the blue. I've been dealing with some health issues lately, kind of brought up some fear, some anxiety, some questions about mortality, and we had a really interesting discussion. And one of the things that we feel society, especially men, currently have trouble dealing with is communicating these kind of fears, these anxieties that may come up from them, talking about them. It feels like weakness sometimes. So I wanted to explore that with Jordan. And I know you as well had some issues you went through with your health. And
Right. I mean, there's been chronic issues, and I'm in my late 30s now, and I guess by the time you get to my age, I think most people have had something go sideways with their health, or something unexpected happen that may not be the result of an injury that's confusing and mysterious, and it's very anxiety provoking, and it's other than that happening to a dependent of mine, not a dependent, a child of mine, it's the most anxiety provoking thing. It's worse if I'm worried about one of my kids and something they're dealing with. But when it's myself, it's equally bad because the position comes onto the table of what would happen if I was compromised to the point where I couldn't provide and take care of them, or worse, what would happen if I became a dependent of them and attacks on my family? So it goes deep where my mind. I'll try to use I statements rather than generalize. Where my mind goes and my emotions go when I'm dealing with something that has to do with infirmity or mortality. There's so many different anxieties that come in that are, most of them don't have as much to do for me with the mystery and the unknown realm of death, to tell you the truth. That's not as fearsome to me as what I just mentioned, the prospect of provider or even becoming an energy tax on them, and the suffering, the potential suffering that would come, physical and emotional suffering
the
that would come.
guilt associated with that, where people stay with you even though you feel like you're not providing and all that stuff.
Exactly.
And your whole perception of yourself, right? That's a big thing for me. It's like my perception of myself as being strong or being physically capable,
Mhm.
and then questioning that. Like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, well, what's going on here? Why am I so vulnerable all of a sudden?
Yeah, it's such a catch-22, man, because like, you get new masculinity movements, right? This day and age that are very focused on men being vulnerable. And I think that I've embraced that to some extent, and I've also pushed back on it to some
Yeah.
extent more recently, because I think there's a there's a medicinal way that kind of conversation or approach can be brought, and there's a pathological way that it can be brought. And when it gets too strong, it starts to attack things like strength and like resilience. Like if you're dealing with a narrative, or you're dealing with a movement that's all about men being more vulnerable and more emotional and more open, you can also very quickly, and I think we have on a societal level, developed an overcompensating movement that seeks to attack things like strength and resilience, which we really do need and we need to rely on. So like, what is the balance as a man, right? And we were just having this conversation as as we're trying to pursue and rediscover and promote age-old virtues. What's the value in
Well, so
being honest about our anxieties while still being true to the need as men, initiated men, to be resilient and strong for our families and for ourselves?
I'll say that anything that takes you out of being action driven,
Hmm.
right? So
Okay.
I think that being vulnerable, or let's say I'm going through this anxiety right now, right? Waiting for these test results.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I don't talk about it and I keep it in. It can start affecting my ability to perform,
Yes.
right? It can actually have an opposite effect. So if I'm sitting here all day and I'm consumed with my mind, consumed with my fears, and I need to get something done, I'm not going to be 100%. Now, vice versa, if I'm just sitting there all day and whining and complaining and putting out in the world, and like it
Yeah.
becomes about me, victim, victim, victim. I need care. I'm suffering. That vice on the opposite end is an extreme, which takes me out of action and performance as well. I think the fundamental goal here is that you should have a select group as a man. I
Mm-hmm.
really do think it's important, of people you can confide in. I
Mm-hmm.
think in some ways it's also important that you have a group of men you can confide in for certain things.
Mm-hmm.
There's also your relationship with your wife or whoever that is that you're going to have. I'm very, very open, in my relationship, and she knows all my vulnerabilities. I choose to do that. But I think it's also strong to have a small group. You give them you tell them, I'm anxious over this. No embarrassment, no excuses for it. That's just how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can help kind of set your mind a little more straight so that you can go back to doing what you need to do and get through the day.
Yeah.
And I think there is a virtue in that. I don't know what it is, but I think there is a virtue in that.
Right. I think that the virtue, there's two virtues in that. There's two virtues in that, maybe more, but the two that I identify right off the bat are honesty and compassion and generosity. So three kind of. So by being honest about, say, your vulnerability or anxieties, for one, you're confronting your own dragon in the cave, so to speak. Opened that door of mystery and uncertainty, and that's a scary door, rather than saying that door doesn't exist, nothing there, everything's fine. You've answered the door. You've delved into the realm of the unknown. I don't fucking know what's going on. I'm in the realm of the unknown. And you're looking the dragon in the face. Fear of death, fear of suffering, fear of not being a provider, fear of being weak, fear of all of these things. So by being honest with yourself and others, you've provided yourself an opportunity towards self-actualization through integrating that experience, that fearsome thing, and growing stronger through it. And I think the generosity comes in on both counts. So, let's talk about the conversation that you and I are having. By withholding who you are from me in a conversation as a friend, you're not being generous. You're being stingy with yourself. You're not showing me who you really are. I might just see Ilan, the kickboxer, Ilan, the entrepreneur, Ilan, the one who is always successful, always confident, and that's good. And I'm attracted to that, and that's nice, and but it's obviously not everything who you are, because you're a deep human. So by offering the honesty, you're also giving a piece of generosity to the relationship, and you're providing whoever you're talking with, that group of men, your wife, whoever, an opportunity to be of service to you. One of the stingiest things that I think a human can do, and I've done this with people to punish them, is it's like a pathological way of punishing somebody, and I'm fully guilty of it. I withdraw all opportunities that they might have to give to me.
Mm-hmm. That is an actual manipulative thing to do, for sure.
Yeah. And so we as humans, I think that our core, the meaning that we find in life generally comes from purpose, and purpose generally comes from finding what it is we have to offer to the world and to others. So by making oneself available and saying, hey, I need some help in this, you're giving someone else the opportunity to provide generosity and compassion, which adds to their own self-actualization.
So I have a friend who studies the Kabbalah, and he was talking to me about this one day, and he said, because I was like, well, why would, if God exists, why would he create people who are mentally handicapped? And, faith is an interesting thing for me. I talk about it a lot. And he was like, the greatest gift that a person can give another person is not to serve them, but to allow themselves to be an opportunity of service.
Yes.
And so a person who is born mentally handicapped, I don't know if that's the correct term nowadays. There's a new term. I'm not trying to offend anyone if I'm saying the term mentally handicapped and it offends somebody.
Right.
But any type of disability, right? Anyone who is born disabled is in a state of a certain degree of dependency, right? It's just there. Physically, it will just be there. It is a reality. And that dependency creates an opportunity of service for every person in their life. They are a gift because they draw the attention off of another person to allow it to go onto them. And one of the greatest things, my mom always tells me, Elon, if you're having anxiety, go do something for someone else. Go put your attention on someone else, and it will dissipate. It will go away. She's right. She's been through a lot. She's absolutely right on that. And so I absolutely agree with you that the greatest gift you can give someone, or one of the meanest things you could do to someone, is withdraw and not allow them to have that opportunity.
Yep.
Whether it's a wife, whether it's a friend, whatever that thing is. So that's really interesting that came up.
Yeah, that is. Those ones are obvious, not obvious, but those ones are what are coming up for me. And it's like, well, what else, you know? I mean, what do you think the balance? Let's talk about strength for a minute, you know, because that's like such at the core here. So is there the possibility to just find strength in being honest about the weakness? Is there strength in the vulnerability? To what extent? So, you know, I think all of us as men have been in a situation where whether it was middle school, high school, or whether it was as a grown man, where we speak some level of vulnerability in a group of men, and the response is more like, get over it, you pussy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like laughing it off, you pussy, you know, man up, up. And it's like, that kind of response, I think, is ingrained in men as a group response to a man presenting vulnerability. And it happens and has happened cross-culturally speaking throughout time. It's like the idea of machismo. It's like, you just let down your machismo guard, get it together, man up. I think there's something, and that particular interaction, it would be described in politically correct terms as toxic masculinity. Or
I disagree.
I do too.
It's there for a reason. It's there again because it comes down to the need. We talk about what men's role in society is, and I know that gender roles are under attack, but I don't care. I mean, there's roles.
Right.
And I'm not saying they have to be universally followed. There's a spectrum, but by and large, we both agree on this. There are certain things that men excel at and that they're predispositioned biologically to do. And men cannot become non-action driven, like I said previously. Right. And so if you look from a biological standpoint, imagine we're in nature, imagine we're animals, and our only form of communication is we need to get this task done. How are we going to get it done? Mm-hmm. And you see one of your pack all of a sudden becoming completely self-consumed, not working for the benefit of the pack, and start to self-focus. Yeah. And now their attention is on themselves and not the goal.
Yep.
Right. Which is what that is. That's what anxiety, that's what fear, that's what weakness, that's what vulnerability in many ways is. Now there's two different kinds of vulnerability. I would say that there's healthy vulnerability, like we talked about earlier, which is I'm going to tell you guys how I feel. I'm going to look for advice so that I can go back to performing. And then there's what you would call, I would say, toxic vulnerability, if we're using these terms.
Yeah.
It becomes all self-consuming.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes entirely, now the world revolves around you.
Mm-hmm.
And that draws everyone's attention onto you instead of what needs to get done. And so I think that exists for that biological reason. It's a survival mechanism that is ingrained in us. So I think that does need to be there. I also think that we do need to explore. Here's what I want to say. There's a lot of men, and I watch these like medical shows and all these shows where people do surgeries. I just find it interesting. And the number one thing I see come up with men is that men don't go to the doctor. Men don't go get tested. Men don't go do colonoscopies. Men don't go do all the tests that could save their lives before something escalates. They wait till things are so bad and they haven't talked about it. Often their partner doesn't even know their symptoms. And then bam, you have stage 4 cancer. When you've been having these symptoms for 3 years, you could have gone to a doctor and you could have just gotten checked. Whereas women constantly go get checked. That's why their insurance is higher. I remember that Obama was saying that was sexist. No, insurance companies know that women go to the doctor far more and it costs them more money. They get more tests done. And so their insurance is higher.
And they live longer.
What?
And they live longer.
And they live longer because of it. But men there's some biological function there where men, number one, are scared to get tested. It's proven. They're more scared than women to get tested. And that they also see it as weakness to go get tested. Mm-hmm. And so they hold off. And it's interesting because that does not benefit the goal. In other words, this kind of beneficial quality in a modern day society has a clear-cut negative impact in the case where it stops people from doing what they need to do, which is you need to go get tested. If you're a 45-year-old male or a 50-year-old male or whatever go get the colonoscopy. You know what I mean? Like there's no reason not to. In fact, it's fear preventing you from doing it, and this idea of weakness. And so there's a spectrum here. That's what I'm torn with. It's like I say that it needs to exist, but at the same time, I do also think that men do need to be vulnerable. and say, okay, I'm scared of doing this, but I'm going to do it. I talked about it. My pack told me I should do it. I'm going to go do it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a spectrum. I'm curious, and I agree with you, like, about that piece about men encouraging each other, albeit through sarcastic and snarky means. That's the most accessible form of communication in times like that very often. To man up, get back on your feet, and pull your shit together. And I think that there's a gift in that at the right times. That's not what you tell. That's not what you tell somebody when they're about to go and do an operation. That's not what you tell somebody when they're like, but I think the gut response of that is often accurate and true. And I mentor. I've told you this. I think I've said on the channel. I mentored teenage boys for like 4 years, and one of the approaches that we would always try to integrate, because it was kind of a feminine. It was an overly feminine program in my judgment now, more than if I were to do it again, it would be more purely archetypally masculine. But we would encourage them toward the vulnerability and toward the authentic and more honest and direct support of each other. But they would always tend toward the snarkiness. And the funny thing was, very often when we would be trying to encourage a directly honest support communication, like circle or something for a boy, it felt a little contrived and weird. And when it would loosen up and we'd like take a snack break or something and he'd like go be hanging in his group of friends, they'd be giving him this shit for the same thing that we were just trying to be directly honest and supportive about, more feminine and comforting about. And it's almost like the giving him shit snarkiness provided more life oftentimes in him than the contrived comfort thing that we did. So it's like I think it can be trusted. Like if you've got a group of brothers who you really know and they're giving you shit, there's love in that. I mean, my closest friends are only my closest friends because I know they're going to tell me I'm full of shit when it's time to tell me I'm full of shit, and not comfort me and pat me on the back and just say, poor baby, so.
Especially when you're at your lowest, because that's when you need people like that to pull you together.
Yeah. It's funny, and the self-pity thing is, I love it. It brings me right out of it. If I'm starting to spin my wheels in some sort of self-pity or victim mentality, particularly, or hyper anxiety, to get a snarky comment that just cuts right through it. It can bring laughter, and it can get me back on my feet. And you were speaking from kind of a biological perspective, like in comparison to animals and things like that. And I think that's appropriate from a physical survival standpoint. But I like to take things as well a step further to the metaphysical realm, and I do think that taking it to the realm of meaning and purpose and just spiritual self-actualization is an important dimension to consider as well. Yes, having that reinforced masculine, action-oriented pressure. So Jordan Peterson would call it like enforced, he calls like marriage enforced monogamy or something like that. He would call it like enforced masculinity or enforced social structures of enforced resilience or something like that. Having that also encourages an individual, let's say a man, because in most cases it is, back into a place of self-actualization through his own ability to provide and serve. Rather than spinning his wheels in something that leads to hell, leads to
well, there's no benefit.
Nothing more hellish than groveling in your own bullshit of ego mania. I mean, that is Dante's metaphorical hell, right? I mean,
so I will say that anything that takes you away from living your purpose, and a lot of people don't even know what their purpose is nowadays. But if you have a clear-cut purpose, if you have a clear-cut focus, right? And then you get consumed with yourself, it draws you away from that focus. It draws you away from that purpose. I mean, you do need that kind of entity to come in, whatever that thing is, whatever that guy that comes along and tells you, hey, bro, you got to pull it together. And there's even in times of great tragedy, people do not feel like it's authentic when you coddle them. In my experience, in times when I've been through tragedy and I've been around really close friends who've been through, everyone's like, I just don't know what to say. And like, everyone gets weird about it. And like, the people who really know you and the people who are really going to dig down and like confront you with these concepts that you're dealing with and try and help you get through it, they're not pretty about it. You know what I mean? They don't sugarcoat it for you. They'll sit there with you in the hardest parts of it. They'll let you cry. They won't say a word.
Mm-hmm.
And when the time comes to tell you what they need to tell you, they'll tell you what they need to tell you, and they'll help you through it. And if the time comes to crack a joke, they'll crack a joke, even at the time where it seems most inappropriate, and you'll get it. You know what I mean? You'll just accept it, and it'll kind of be the right thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that only comes from that circle of trust, and that kind of bond that you create with other men, which is sorely lacking again in society today. You know, this is so off topic, but it's just popped in my head because we're just like, we keep using the word man or whatever. I Googled the definition. So I went on to Google because I was having this issue with trying to get a definition from people on what a man is. So I said, what is a man definition on Google?
Oh no.
Did I tell you what the result was?
No, but I don't think I can handle it. Go for it.
Take a guess. You get one guess.
Definition of a man. A human being who self-identifies as male.
No, but you're close. A human of either sex, a person.
Okay.
Now, what is the definition of a woman?
Well, hey, that would be an appropriate definition for in a Webster's for like, as long as there were other definitions with it, because people say man. You know what I'm saying? Like God's gift to man.
No, they're talking about like they're saying a man, like a male. Like what is a man?
A man is different than just man. Yeah, very different.
Yes. What is the definition of a man? That is their definition. Then I Googled, can men get pregnant? And they say, yes, men can get pregnant. In fact, it's quite common. That's totally outside the realm of this conversation. I just had to throw it in there because I felt like it was relevant to everything I see going on in society nowadays.
We'll have to circle back on that because we were going to have a conversation about consistency. And those are great examples about inconsistency, which is a result of letting the masculine dimension of a culture deteriorate. Is definitions become fluid, non-fixed, and it just becomes about whoever's got the biggest, the loudest microphone and the highest soapbox calls the shots, and that's where we're at with exactly what you're describing.
That's not even a definition by the standards of what a definition needs to be, because a definition needs to have characteristics to define it. In other words, if I say, what is a man? A man is either sex. And then I say, okay, so what are the two sexes? Male and female. So what is a male? A male is a man or a woman of either sex. What is a female? It's a cyclical definition. There's no clear-cut characterization of what a male is versus a female in that definition. If I told you what is a home, and your definition for a home was a house, and I said, what is a house? And your definition for a house was a home, that would not be a definition.
Right.
That would be a synonym. Or whatever you want to refer to it as.
We need to circle back on this though, because it's a whole.
Man, I could go on an hour right now on that, because that just drives me crazy. But it's so outside the realm of. But it does give me anxiety when I read that stuff. I'm like, oh man, I'm anxious now, or anger. I don't know. It puts me down some kind of weird path.
It definitely both for me, and disgust, which I do believe is a certified emotion.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely is. Okay, so we've touched on the fact that there's both a biological and metaphysical need to be strong, and kind of that machismo and why it exists. And there's also, we've touched on the fact that there's that counterpart, which you do believe that, I think we both agree that vulnerability does have its uses, and being able to talk about things does have its uses. Do you think the effects of what I would call victimhood society, which is where we're at today, in my opinion, has had a massive effect on masculinity and kind of that kind of necessary thing that we talked about, which is be able to get the job done? I mean, we see people 35 still living at home, having excuses for why they can't provide for themselves.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's just one example of many, and I think each time that we do one of these conversations that is focusing on virtues, I think what we'll discover is that the pop culture, the mainstream idea or culture, the mainstream directionality, let's call it, that we're seeing forced or contrived onto us in the modern days, is almost every time a complete inversion of what traditionally would be a directionality that seeks virtues. So virtue being strength, resilience, victory, winning, growth, pursuit, service, things that require virtues. All of the virtues, by definition, are aspects of conduct or self-perception that require one to face hardship, get stronger, grow through it, and then provide through that. So it's like, I think of it as concentric circles. Each virtue is an opportunity. It's a new concentric circle from where you're at to step into a wider level of competence through hardship, so that you can be more capable of serving. And that directionality has been refuted in modern day political correctness and new sensibilities of what's good and what's evil and what's moral, in favor of the complete opposite. And victimhood and victim mentality and victim culture is a complete example of that. You know, I had a conversation about the Jussie Smollett phenomenon about a year and a half ago. So you remember what happened with him, right?
Yep.
He's a reasonably successful guy. I mean, he's not like a A-list actor, but he's like
very successful, by the way. In the spectrum of what an actor can accomplish, he's considered extremely successful. Yeah.
Okay. And he's just one example of this kind of thing happening. So he's extremely successful. He's a black guy. He's a gay guy, right? So he's by all measures, he is kicking ass. He's crushing it. I presume he's worked very hard to be where he's at. There's a lot of people who want to act, and not everybody makes it as far as him. Very few people make it as far as him. He's making good money. He's on a popular TV show. He's doing well. By all measures of a virtuous society, one that upholds self-application, strength, resilience, pursuit, service, and things like that, he should be applauded. He should be considered successful. He should be happy with what he's accomplished through his self-application. But there's something missing in Jussie Smollett's self-perception, in his moral spectrum of his achievement in his universe, or the false universe that he's subscribing to. In the real universe, strength, self-application, self-actualization are the winners. Jussie was subscribing to a false universe in which being the victim is being on the top.
And he was the opposite of a victim.
He was the opposite, and he couldn't accept that, so he contrived and lied about a situation to present a fictitious reality that he had probably even convinced himself was real. So with people like this who subscribe to these realities, it doesn't matter if some Trump supporter actually jumped him and hurt him in his mind, in Jussie's mind. What matters is that the reality that he's trying to demonstrate through the charade is true. It doesn't matter that it didn't actually happen this time. This is a real phenomenon, and I'm trying to draw attention to it. And that's exactly how a lot of media outlets responded to it. Well, it doesn't matter that he lied. You know, white supremacy is a problem, and it's pointing to a wider issue. And so in his mind, the access to the truth, the access to the self-actualization, the access to the moral high ground and the virtue is actually victimhood. And he was seeking the crown not through his actual accomplishments, but through his being rendered a victim. And I think you find that a lot with increasingly. I think there was something similar where Madonna was like.
Well, there's so many cases of
successful people who have kicked ass, and I commend them. I applaud them for what they've done and created. Then trying to flip it to this whole poor me victim thing and seeking additional.
Well, they're seeking validation, and they're seeking. And you know what? I have to there's one thing I don't know if I agree
It's
with you.
not just validation though. It's moral high. It's moral
Yes,
high.
it's moral high ground.
That's the inversion. Is that the morality is flipped? You
Yes,
know,
because you're a victim, you have more value in society.
and you're of more moral
Yes,
substance.
authority,
Yeah.
more moral value. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that. So there's something I saw happen years ago, and this was 15 years ago, before like the media was so blatantly crazy, and like, but it was happening with Israel. It's a weird conversation about Israel where there were, in the span of like 6 months, I had noticed that they were called out, media sites were called out for manipulating photos. So in one case, like one of the Reuters journalists, I believe, had put plumes of smoke in Lebanon, making it seem like there were these huge bombings. Then there was like obviously the whole made up, that the whole Jenin massacre that never ended up happening, that was reported 5,000 dead bodies. There was 50 or 47, 43 of which were armed. I started seeing this trend, and then there was the flotilla thing where they had cropped the photos to leave out the soldier getting stabbed in the back as he was fighting someone off, and they made it seem like the soldiers were. And then it hit a point where there was a very popular picture of a girl in Syria who was like, I don't remember, beaten and like soldiers around her, something like that, and they were passing it around saying it's Israel. And again, this is not a political thing like I'm defending or whatever Israel. This is just about a matter of a series of things that got me woken up to how much people are willing to lie and manipulate to back up their narrative. And so my friends were posting this, and I said, guys, this is Syria. This is a picture from Syria. It's not Israel. You should number one, call out the news source that has convinced you that this is a picture of Israel, because you're now circulating it, and you should remove yourself from circulating it. It's false information. This is before the whole fake news thing. And their response was always consistently the same. It doesn't matter if it's a picture of Syria. That happens in Israel. I'm like, then show me the picture of it happening in Israel.
Exactly.
Don't show me the picture of it happening in Syria. You're a liar. Until you show me the, like, in other words, if I'm a victim, I don't need to go seek evidence for being a victim. I will have evidence that I'm a victim. You know what I mean? Like,
you don't need to fake evidence, is what you're saying. You might need to seek it, but you don't need to fake it.
You don't need to fake the evidence. Yes, you don't need to come out and then justify faking evidence by saying, well, the problem exists, so it doesn't matter if I lied. It doesn't matter. I did whatever I had to do to bring attention to the problem by showing another tragedy. It's like, well, no, it does matter. And that's kind of the inception in my head of when I started coming to terms with where society is headed. And this is like, honestly, 15 years ago, where I was shocked at some of the things people were willing to justify. And then obviously I felt the same thing happening now. Again, not to get overly political. I know there's people who love Biden. I know there's people who love Trump. But it was just a matter of, again, we're going to touch on this in the next episode, consistency. Kids in cages bad, then kids in cages okay. Middle East, taking action in the Middle East makes you racist and a bad person. Bombing the Middle East now under this new administration is okay. Not wearing masks is bad and makes you a super spreader. Then Biden didn't wear his own mask after his own mandate, and people defended it and said it's okay. It was a historical moment. You go to a Trump rally, you're a super spreader. Biden, I mean, I'm just going to keep giving examples because people need to be called out on this. Then you go and you celebrate Biden becoming president, which is good for you. I'm personally against lockdowns, but you're 10,000 people that you were just a super spreader if you did this at a Trump rally a week prior. So it's like, to me, it's just it's like a mind kind of, I don't want to use it to cuss, but it really is like, it messes up my head because I'm like, it's one of the most frustrating things to me. I'm not saying the other side doesn't do it too. I have friends now on the right who constantly use Holocaust comparisons. And this is, again, I actually defend Gina Carano. I'm going on a weird rant here, but I feel like Gina Carano should not have been targeted that way because her own, again, there's bias here. Her own castmate uses Holocaust comparisons. She does one that's far less offensive. She's fired, unpersoned, erased from society. In other words, there's hypocrisy there. But even my friends on the right now are all using Holocaust comparisons after saying people shouldn't call Trump Hitler. It works on both sides, but I just see it so much on sadly on that side of the equation, the left nowadays, that it's really, really, really kind of turned me off. And I have a hard time with a lot of people I'm friends with because of it. They'll justify anything.
Yeah. Well, I think we should dig into the underbelly of that, like the deeper, like, so what we've kind of talked about here, what you just kind of went over were sort of symptoms, right? These are like, like if these are the symptoms that are presenting themselves. But I'd love to have a conversation next time about consistency.
Well, that's it. That is about consistency.
Exactly. On and the deep psycho-spiritual levels of consistency and inconsistency, because it's a big, I think it's a really big, rich topic.
Well, yeah, and I think just, and I always just tell people, I mean, I won't get into that topic, but I always tell people have loyalty to the truth over your tribe. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, you're always have loyalty to the truth.
Yep.
Right? If you believe kids in cages was bad just, a year ago, then please still believe it today. If you believe bombing the Middle East is bad, please still believe it today. Like, just please just keep believing the things you believe instead of just jumping ship. I mean, we went off topic, but that's just one thing I'm putting out there that kind of rubs me the wrong way. And it's not even what this podcast is necessarily intended to do. We're supposed to talk about masculinity and all these things, but
yeah. But there's a masculinity component in that. There really is. But I don't know if you want to derail this conversation, if you want to wrap up the anxiety piece.
I really feel like we covered everything with anxiety, and we kind of went a good amount of time. Okay. But I do feel like, number one, it's helped me. You know what I'd like to talk about, just on a final note? You had said earlier that your fears have more to do with being incapable of being a provider, or your perception of yourself, all those things, but you're not scared of your own mortality. Can we just jump into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So, I think for me, I've always, ever since I was a kid, I can remember being very cognizant and very aware of the shortness and the brevity of life and my own mortality. Now we're going into another big topic, which is kind of mortality and death. But for me,
but anxiety is I think that for a lot of men, that is at the core of.
Yeah, I'm not personally afraid to die. I consider it a right, and quite frankly, I think it's a right that we are probably going to have to fight for at some point. As a generation, I do think that it's a right that could potentially be taken away if the technology came about that could preserve life ad infinitum, which is obviously the direction that technology and medicine seems to apply itself toward, a goal of some sort of physical immortality. But I believe in the immortal soul and the mortality of the body, and I believe that the nature and the definition of life is death itself, and that if we had a situation in which I did not die, then I wouldn't really de facto be alive anymore. I wouldn't be much different than an inanimate object that wasn't born or would die. So I consider the fact that I'm mortal, the fact that I'm going to die, as that which gives my life meaning. So the temporality of it, the ephemerality of it, is what makes it what it is. So that's kind of the core of why I'm not afraid of death itself. However, I consider being born, and I look at birth, I look at my birth, and conceptually speaking, philosophically speaking, I look at birth itself and life as an opportunity for responsibility. And so I have a number of responsibilities in this life right now. My children primarily, my relationship to my wife, and working to create the conditions where their life will be as purposeful and abundant as it possibly can be. And that's doing my job as a father. My job as a father is to become obsolete. My job as a father is to not be needed eventually, and so working toward that. And so if I were without dependence, I'm not sure how I would feel about the whole thing. If I were just a single man, the prospect of my death would be more of a lamenting what I couldn't have personally experienced in my life. Oh, I wish I could have done that and had that experience or that, and the sadness that I would have left behind in people through parting, but not as core of an existential fear as leaving those who I'm responsible for and who I brought into this world incapable of fending for themselves.
And that is a legitimate Like, and that's the whole fear of going before your time. You know what I mean? That you didn't have a chance to pass on those things, and you didn't have a chance to make sure that the people you love most are going to be taken care of. That is a scary fear, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, that's the biggest one for me. That's hands down my biggest fear. So the interesting catch-22 is what I learned kind of listening to you in this conversation is not to be paralyzed by that fear. That is the greatest fear, and it's a paralyzing fear. And if I were to let that fear become paralyzing, then I may as well already be dead and neglecting that duty. If I let my anxiety of dying before my time paralyze me to my capacities and responsibilities to vivaciously raise my children, then it's
a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I'm dead before my time already, even without having my heart stop beating. So the masculine reinforcement of get back to action. Yes, you are afraid, Jordan. Yes, this is a terrible prospect, but put down your phone, quit Googling whatever health condition it could be, quit thinking about, quit fretting, let's say, about the deterioration of our culture and the prospects for my children's lives. Put that shit down. Go play Legos with the kids. Go take them outside and teach them about what tree that is, what flower that is, because otherwise,
well, that's
right,
living. Yeah, that's living. I mean, I'd rather live for a day than be dead for 100 years and not do anything. You know what I mean? And so, I'm glad you mentioned the Google thing. I forgot to bring it up. Hey, anyone watching, if you're Googling, health symptoms, just stop. Google will tell you you're dying. Intentional. They want you to be scared. Anything you could Google that your nose is running and it'll be lymphoma. You know what I mean? It'll be like an aneurysm. They're like, oh, well, aneurysms cause leaky fluid to exit from your nose. So if you have a cold, it might be an aneurysm. Just stop looking at Google. There's a quote I wanted to share with you from a film I like called The Fountain, which is a very interesting film.
Good film, man. Wow.
Yeah, by Darren Aronofsky. And it kind of touches on these very deep existential things. And the quote from the film is, death is the road to awe. And so like that always stuck with me. I was like, what does he mean by that? You know what I mean? Like, what does that actually mean? And it means exactly what you said, that with that death, our own mortality, our own limitedness is the road to awe, because in contrast to it, we get to live.
Yes. That
it is the all-consuming, the singular guaranteed thing in our life. And so that is the true road to awe, is the realization that is coming, because that will let you live your life in awe. And that's how I took it.
Yes.
And so, regardless of what you believe, I think that's a beautiful way to see it.
Me too. Thanks for sharing that. I love that. I love that film too.
Yeah. $5 million they shot it on. It was looked like much more expensive. Yeah, it's famous for that. They did it against like plates. It's a very, very unique. I'm in the film industry. Don't want to brag. Yeah. But no, I know. I actually studied that film. It was an interesting film. And Rachel Weisz is fantastic. She's an actress in it. She's really solid in that movie.
Yeah.
And on that note, thanks for coming on today, Jordan. And hashing out these deep ideas.
I'm holding my tongue right now in respect for the time. And
no, go ahead, say it.
No, I got nothing. I'm deliberately letting it go.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching. Please subscribe. If you watch this long, definitely subscribe. It would mean a lot. Thanks so much.